It begins. There was a sort of pall in the air, Kakashi idly mused as he approached the Valley of the End, where his two students, promising young shinobi, both were fighting. He felt disgusted in Sasuke's behavior, as he had disobeyed the very advice that Kakashi had given barely 24 hours earlier. And loath as he is to admit it, Sasuke will have to pay for his actions, last of his clan or no. The sky darkened as he approached the cliff face that separated the land of fire from the land of sound, and the pall in the air thickened, making it rather trying in terms of breathing normally. For civilians, it might seem as though the air was too thick to breathe, but for as seasoned a jonin as him, it was hardly noticeable. The scene he came upon, however, could not be so lightly ignored. Rasengan, Chidori, both are powerful jutsu in their own rights, even working to counterbalance each other in terms of chakra usage. Rasengan, the ultimate form of shape transformation, so powerfully condensed that, in the right hands, it could rend even the most powerful of barriers to dust. Chidori, the ultimate form of nature transformation. What it lacks in destructive power it more than makes up for in its ability to pierce almost anything that it comes across. Kakashi had only once wondered what would happen if the two were to clash, and that had been 3 days ago, not even. He had come to the conclusion that the outcome of such a thing would kill both users. Apparently, he hadn't taken into account two things. 1. The practically inhuman regenerative power that the Kyuubi gave Naruto. 2. The curse seal, level 2. Granted, Kakashi only knew about one of those two, and had only the barest of information on the other, but he had thought that he knew exactly what would happen should the two jutsu go against each other. But because of the two things he hadn't taken into account, he was wrong. And all the proof was in front of him. Sasuke watched on as Naruto lay where he'd been launched. He knew, that had either of their aim been off by even the slightest of millimeters, then both of their jutsu would have been exponentially more powerful from drawing on the other, killing both users. Luck, Sasuke thought, was the only thing that kept them alive. Was the only thing keeping Naruto alive. But not anymore, Sasuke thought, standing over his ex-teammate. Your luck has run out, Naruto. He pulled out a kunai, his chakra reserves too diminished to do another jutsu, and moved to strike. The next thing he saw was the angry red of Naruto's eyes before being launched back. How could he still have power? Sasuke calculated his chances of winning the fight as is, then made a wise decision. Leave Naruto alive and kill him another day. And it was the last that anyone of Konoha would see of Uchiha Sasuke for years to come. Kakashi snapped himself out of his stupor. What was he doing? Standing there gaping like an academy student in the presence of the Hokage? He rushed forth to catch the fleeing Sasuke, but was stopped by a swipe from Naruto. Naruto, what, was all Kakashi let out before he met the red eyes of his student and realized the truth. That wasn't Naruto he was fighting, it was Kyuubi. So Kakashi-sensei, you're my next opponent, are you? Naruto's voice cut through the air like glass. Kakashi was floored. Naruto was in control? And he was still attacking his teacher like they were enemies. Kakashi dodged another swipe, then a kick, before retaliating with one of his own. He reached into his pouch, pulling out something he never thought he'd have to utilize. Back when Kakashi had made the passing of Team 7 official, the Sandaime had given him a small bundle of chakra-suppressing seals, as it was entirely possible that Naruto would have to draw upon Kyuubi's chakra, and they had no basis for how much control he would have. The Sandaime had shared the whole truth to Naruto, that the Shodai's wife had been the first Jinchuriki for Kyuubi, and Naruto's mother the second, with Naruto being the third. He also said that Mito had never had need to call upon Kyuubi's chakra, and that Kushina's chakra was somehow particularly effective in controlling Kyuubi's chakra. As such, there was no idea how it would affect Naruto, as he would have need to use the demonic chakra. And it was quite obvious that Naruto didn't have the same chakra anomaly that his mother had. At the time, such a thing had seemed quite idiotic. After all, how could Naruto, naive, cheerful Naruto, lose himself in a bloody rage? Kakashi had just found out how wrong they'd been. He moved in close, slapping one of the seals upon Naruto, before suitably restraining him and heading back to Konoha. Kakashi could feel it in his heart. He'd lost the last remaining family of his friend, and shortly after, may have lost the only remaining tie to his sensei. He was too late. Always too late. The return had been unnaturally somber. Sakura stood vigil at the gate, having seen the team of medics come and pass, waiting for her sensei to return with her teammates in tow. She had become even more distraught at the sight of the injured members of the team that had returned thus far, and was afraid of how horribly injured Sasuke and Naruto not Naruto. He'd had a bad habit of bouncing back from injury almost immediately. He'd just have a few scrapes, probably a broken arm to complain about. Yeah, Naruto will be alright, Sakura affirmed, calmer than before. Which was why she was stunned to see that, when the final group of med-nins returned with Kakashi, not even 5 minutes had passed since the group escorting Lee and, Sakura shivered, Gaara, had returned, carrying a bound Naruto. Sensei, what happened? Why's Naruto tied up? Where's Sasuke? She looked up to her teacher in the hope that he would give her words of comfort. All she got in return was that the mission was a failure and to head home and await further orders. And suddenly it all made sense. Mission failure. Mission, failure. Failure. Sasuke wasn't coming back, and something had happened to Naruto. Maybe he'd just been too stubborn and Kakashi had had to restrain and knock him out. Sakura nodded to herself, once more comforted by her own conclusions. After all, for what reason would Kakashi have to restrain Naruto outside of his stubbornness? The room was white, almost blindingly so. The room itself bare, save for a single hospital bed, with a patient strapped upon it. At the moment, the boy, 13 years of age, was only wearing a black t-shirt and solid blue boxers. His blonde hair was spread across his head, framing his tanned face, where each cheek held 3 black lines, birthmarks, with startling perfection. He looks almost peaceful, Tsunade mused, as she checked over him one last time for the night. No injuries. Patient is presently unconscious and restrained due to uncharacteristic aggression, Tsunade muttered under her breath and into a voice recorder, an old habit that doctors and med-nins got into long ago. Her hand was glowing green with the effects of the mystical palm jutsu. She moved to his head, turning it to the side with her other hand. No chemical imbalances, but limbic system appears inflamed. Attempting to HEA. Tsunade was cut short as her mystical palm turned against her, becoming red and scalding her. She put an end to the jutsu and set about fixing her burned hand. I believe I found the source of the aggression. It appears to be an annex of demonic chakra that has contained itself within the limbic system. Whether it is there because of patient's affliction or something else has yet to be known. She continued, consummate professional that she was, and was careful to avoid mentioning Kyuubi. After all, you never know who might listen to the recording. Tomorrow I stop the sedatives for the patient's safety, and Jiraiya will come by that afternoon to perform his own check, as the presence of demonic chakra calls for his expertise. Tsunade is a professional, and she prides herself on remaining calm in even the most dire of medical situations, yet when Kakashi had come to her begging that she fix his student in the most heartbroken of voices, she had first thought that Naruto was dying. Her first order of business was to remove the chakra restraining seal, as such a thing was dangerous for the patient. Medical jutsu relied as much on the chakra of the patient as it did the user. It worked by turning the user's chakra into a bastardized version of nature energy, allowing the user to copy the patient's chakra and manipulate it to heal the patient. Though there was the potential for backlash, for if the patient's chakra was overly unique, like having an elemental kekkei genkei, then it would attack the user, whose body was unused to using such a chakra. And so, Tsunade removed the chakra restraining seal at the protest of Kakashi. Naruto had stirred as Tsunade started healing him. Kakashi's heart almost stopped when Naruto swiftly moved to rip out Tsunade's throat, but he was able to restrain him before that happened. Tsunade hadn't known about Naruto's odd aggression, and had immediately ordered that he be restrained. Naruto had bit, scratched and kicked as he was placed in the restraints, and had begun spouting obscenities at them, saying that they were idiots, weaklings, that they deserved to die. She didn't know what had gotten into him. And then he'd turned on her. He'd begun by saying how pathetic she was, how it was all her fault. She wasn't strict enough to make her brother patient, so he had rushed out into the battle and died. She wasn't a good enough medic, as she hadn't been able to keep her lover, her fiancé, alive. He'd flung all kinds of insults at her after that, but it was those that had hurt the worst. She'd finally regained her composure while he was childishly taunting her through song, and ordered that he be heavily sedated, and to keep him under sedation for as long as they could. That had been a week ago. Come on sensei, Naruto wakes up today. Ino scolded her teacher, who was starting to lag far behind her. Next to him was her teammate, Shikamaru. You too, you lazy bum. The passers-by would later swear that they heard the young Nara boy breathe, literally breathe, the word, troublesome. Granted, Team 10 was not alone in their trek to the hospital. The remainder of Teams 8, 7 and Guy were also with them, going to visit not just Naruto, but their injured teammates and friends, who were good enough to move around. All of them were planning on being there as Naruto woke up. While the students were chattering on and on about what was new in their lives, the Jonin sensei weren't as joyous about the news concerning Naruto. The official story was that Naruto's injuries had forced the med nin to place him in a medically induced coma, so as to spare him from the pain of recovery, but Kakashi had known the truth. Had been there as the med nins held down Naruto's arm and stabbed him with the needle. Had been there as Tsunade made everyone, with the exception of Kakashi, who knew that she would need consoling, leave while she broke down crying, cradling Kakashi as if he was her lifeline. He, however, did not need consoling himself. That part of him had died when he'd learned that Naruto was in control and not using the Kyuubi's chakra. Had died when he saw Sasuke leave forever and had failed to stop him. Kakashi had told the Jonin sensei of Naruto's former classmates and friends, and they appeared insufficiently wary, in Kakashi's eyes. Kakashi sensei, were you even listening to me? Yes. What is it, Sakura? Thank God he'd been able to fake being like he was before. First chance he'd get, Kakashi would go back into Anbu, and there he would remain for the rest of his days, if all went in his favor. I said we're here. Now, which room is Naruto in? They wouldn't allow visitors before. She looked put off about that little bit of information, and went off on a bunch of dark mutterings about, how could you disturb the patient if the doctors put them in a coma? She'd been distraught over hearing that the mission was a failure, and had spent several days moping before Ino had gotten to her. She told Sakura that it was unbecoming of budding kunoichi like them to spend all their time wallowing in their feelings when they just needed to get stronger. She then revealed that she'd been exaggerating her feelings for Sasuke for all this time just to provoke Sakura into becoming more outspoken. Sakura took to the advice and was back to her old self in no time, even going so far as to reconcile her friendship with Ino. Kakashi made a well-timed eye smile at the antics of his student, before mentioning that Naruto was in the second floor of the South Ward. What he didn't mention was that the South Ward held all the violent patients. Thank God the rooms were soundproofed. You have good timing, I was just about to pull him off the sedatives and wake him up. Migaki, the med nin in charge, said. He was a rather unassuming man, with short, dark almost black hair and equally dark eyes. He wore the traditional med nin scrubs with a scrub cap upon his head. Sakura was relieved. For a second there, her fear had taken over and made her think that something had come up and he had had to be put back in the coma. She stood with the rest of the Konoha 12, the Konoha 11 as Naruto began stirring. Choji and Neji were wheelchair-bound while Kiba had been healed enough that he could walk, and had worn a simple tee and a pair of shorts, both a dark brownish black. Naruto woke up, and immediately began groaning. He made to clutch his head, but was stopped by the restraints, the action making their presence known to the genin, and one chunin, present. Hey, Naruto, how are you feeling? Sakura's soft words didn't seem to have an effect, and Migaki began to tell her about how he might not be completely lucid, and to not have high hopes for good conversation when Naruto interrupted him. How am I feeling? Well, I was feeling good until your weak ass decided to reveal itself. His eyes opened, the irises blood red, but nobody really took note of such a thing compared to what he'd just said. Naruto, why'd you say such a thing? Sakura tried to make light of his insult, while the others were too shocked to speak. I said it 'cause that's what you are. Weak. What, you decide to come here to reaffirm that you're a better ninja than I am? Hey, or maybe you're here to cover up that you know you're weak, and hope that you can keep up your facade that you're a competent kunoichi, when everyone here knows that you'd rather spend more time on your looks than train. Naruto's words were like ice in the heart, cutting Sakura and freezing the blood in her veins beyond belief. Don't say such a stupid thing, you idiot. Ino retaliated in Sakura's defense, and Naruto turned on her. Like you're much better. Unlike her, you actually had potential, but chose to waste it for what? The sake of a friend that fought you every chance she got? Had you been smarter, you would have won your match in the preliminaries. Now Ino was sent reeling from his words, and her teammates went to her defense. Naruto. Shikamaru got his attention. This isn't you, remember? Actually, Shikamaru, this is me, and you're smart enough to notice it. In fact, you're such a brainiac that you don't account for the variables. How's it feel, to know that the very first mission you led was such a failure? To know that it was your actions that almost got everybody killed? That's enough. Asuma wasn't happy. Far from it. He'd heard that Naruto wasn't like the rumors had said. That he wasn't the monster that everybody had thought he was. And he thought that he had been smart in not believing them, when he saw the kid's performance in the preliminaries and against the Hyuga boy. Now, however, he was calling his decision into question. Don't think I'll just sit back and let you insult my students. Of course not, it's very obvious that you're fond of them. Just like everyone knows that you and Kurenai are dating. We are not, Kurenai began to retort, but was cut off. Of course you are, it's obvious to everyone that the two of you are dancing the horizontal tango. Naruto cut them off, eliciting flustered, half-hearted denials. Naruto, that was very unyouthful of you. Lee joined the conversation, Guy agreeing with him. Unyouthful, you say? Perhaps what's unyouthful, Naruto made the word sound like the worst of insults. Is that you think that you can survive as a ninja when you are incapable of using the most basic of jutsu. There will come a time when sheer strength will get you killed, Lee. And as for you, Guy, you hide behind your words of youth to deceive people into thinking that you're just a coward. Coward, always running to be better than your idol, your so-called rival. Naruto's face, which everyone half expected to be marred with a crazed look, instead only held pure, icy calculation. His eyes were like crimson glaciers. All of you are weak. Choji, too self-conscious about his size to reach his potential. Neji, working himself ragged to prove an idiotic point to his uncle. Kiba, your pride speaks for itself, and it says that it will be your death. Hell, it was almost the death of your precious puppy. Kiba had to be held back until the comment about almost killing Akamaru reached his ears. Tenten, always working to prove that she'll be more than average, when she knows that she's already reached her potential. The Kunoichi in question shifted uncomfortably. While the two hadn't exactly been close, their friendship was really only in passing. Shino. No matter how hard you try, your emotions lead your actions, and that's why people are wary of you. It's not that you have a hive of bugs living and crawling inside of you, but rather that you aren't as in control of your emotions as you think you are, and that scares people away. You'll be lucky to find a girl, the way you are. And finally, Kakashi-sensei. Naruto had turned to Kakashi, who had been slowly moving towards the door behind the distraught group of people. So caring, despite how aloof you appear. Tell me, does your heart have anything left in it, or are you already faking that you haven't died inside? Kakashi had frozen, his hand upon the door handle, and just stood there. He said nothing, which prompted Naruto to further taunt him. I don't blame you really. After all, everyone you opened your heart to left you, either dying or turning traitor. Your old team died and left you alone when you needed them most. Your most promising student turned traitor the first chance he got, and let's not forget your father. And just like that, Kakashi snapped. He had to be held back from killing Naruto, all the Jonin restraining him. Guy had him in an arm hold, his hands joined behind Kakashi's head. Asuma was restraining his legs, and Kurenai had to put him in her best incapacitating genjutsu. Naruto had stopped speaking, opting instead to simply grin like the cat that caught the canary. Let's leave. Asuma's cold words worked to bring the others out of their stupor. The door was opened and it was as though the floodgates were opened in full. Everyone left, and Naruto started to laugh. That's right. Leave. Leave like the weak cowards you are. He laughed after them, the words sticking to the group. The door closed, and Naruto was left to himself. Dangerous. It isn't the seal. The voice of a man cuts through the air, disturbing the almost silence of the room. The only sound being the grunting of the patient restrained to the bed as he tried to kill the almost 7-foot-tall man leaning above him. Naruto's mouth had been gagged after he'd harshly bitten the med nin who'd come in for the routine checkup. The man, a rather inexperienced med nin with a fair bit of potential, lost a chunk of skin and had to have one of his fingers reattached. After it was wrestled out of Naruto's mouth, though, Ugai had almost resigned. Then what's causing the demonic chakra in his limbic system? Tsunade hid it well. But Jiraiya could easily pick up the undercurrent of desperation. Looking at the red-eyed boy next to him, who was eyeing the Sannin like he was a piece of meat to be had, he sighed. "I've some theories about it, but I don't think you'll like either of them." "What are they?" This time, hope was prevalent in her voice. "The first is that it's some of Kyuubi's chakra that simply was pulled from the seal, but somehow lingered in the part of his brain that acts as the conduit for him to draw upon it. If that was the case, then it should be easy to simply heal away." Jiraiya looked at Tsunade, and instantly knew that she'd already tried it. And obviously failed. He sighed, moving on to the other option so as to not make her feel any worse. "The second isn't something I'd like to even consider, but given the circumstances surrounding him." "What else is going on, Jiraiya?" A hint of his teammate as she was at her prime. He had no choice but to tell her the truth. "The reason it took me so long to get here was that I was at Myoboku. The toads are in a flurry. When Naruto signed the contract, it was in blood. Binding and, as it should be, irreversible. But his signature is evaporating into nothing, and when it's completely gone, so is his summoning contract with the toads." They fell into silence, looking at the child in between them, who was looking at the both of them, as if deciding which of the two would be tastier. "Perhaps he is," Jiraiya mused regretfully. "He'd failed to protect his godson." "What about your other theory?" Tsunade broke him out of his negative spiraling. "The second theory is that this is a function of the seal that I don't know about. That this was supposed to happen. I doubt that's the answer, but there's nothing to suggest that it isn't." He looked away, defeated. "Then what do we do?" Tsunade looked lost at the hopelessness of the situation. "I've done what I can. You're the Hokage, so anything else is up to you." Jiraiya didn't say what was on both of their minds. "Is there anything left of our Naruto?" Team Guy wasn't the same. Guy had been somber for several hours afterward, until he suddenly sprang up anew, shouting that he will do everything in his power to prove Naruto's words wrong. Lee was the same, until a rousing speech from Guy about the ninja of old having no chakra at all, yet still being the greatest made his vigor return with a vengeance. Tenten consoled herself with the knowledge that she still had many skills that she could refine and build up. Neji had openly admitted that he originally had become so strong despite his uncle, but that now he was working hard to prove to his father that he could make his own choices. It was the same as before. And yet, nothing was the same. Teams 10 and 8 certainly changed after that day with Naruto. Asuma and Kurenai had stopped their relationship until both of them were okay with the idea of openly dating. Choji had recently been released from the hospital, but he didn't have much of an appetite, worrying his parents. Ino had gone into her training with a vengeance, utterly determined to prove that she had what it takes to make Chunin. The action hadn't gone unnoticed by Sakura, who'd quickly joined her. Both of them had made up, and silently chose to forgive and forget. Shikamaru had practically fallen into a kind of depression. The weight of his failed mission, compounded by Naruto's words, had gotten to him, but it was the words of his father one night that helped him get past it. Now, Team 10 was on the road to recovery. Team 8, on the other hand, was a veritable mess. Kiba had taken Naruto's cutting words to heart, and now was nursing a heavy grudge at Naruto. Sure, some part of him knew that Naruto wasn't in his right mind, but he couldn't just take what he'd said without some form or retribution. Shino had been rather closed off, but his behavior suggested that the blonde's remarks hit too close for comfort. The group could only figure that it was simply Hinata's meek appearance that kept her safe from Naruto's wrath, while Hinata simply took it that somewhere, deep down, Naruto remembered his promise to protect her, and that it proved that he was still in there. Team 8 feared that her conclusion was wrong, and didn't know how they could deal with the fallout of Naruto and Hinata. The room was simple enough. There was a low-set coffee table in the middle of the small room, with 2 couches on either side of it. On the upper wall to the right of the door were 4 pictures, each of a different man. These people were the previous Hokages, and soon there was to be a 5th picture, of a woman with amber eyes, dirty blonde hair, and a gray-purple diamond tattoo on the middle of her forehead. That woman, Senju Tsunade, was currently in the room, waiting with her 2 elderly advisors, a bespectacled man by the name of Mitokado Homura, and a woman with her hair done up in a bun, Utatane Kaharu. They were awaiting the 4th member of their party, the unofficial 3rd advisor, Shimura Danzo, a man just as old as the other advisors, whose only defining feature was the bandages that covered his right eye and arm. The man in question entered the quiet room, and sat down next to Tsunade. Now that we are all here, we can begin to discuss the matter at hand. Koharu spoke first. Uzumaki Naruto. Danzo put forth his thoughts on the matter. He's gone berserk after overusing the Kyuubi. That's right, Tsunade confirmed. Naruto's currently restrained in the South Ward of Konoha General. For the past week we've had him in a medically induced coma, from which he was taken out of early today. Why did you end the coma? Homura inquired. Any longer and it would prove detrimental for his health. And do you know what is causing him to act this way? Danzo spoke up again, genuinely interested in the proceedings. After numerous tests, it's been proven that the cause is a concentration of demonic chakra in his limbic system, making him excessively aggressive and bloodthirsty to the point where he had to be gagged for biting the finger off of one of the medics while he was performing rounds. Tsunade replied, unsure about the man's intentions. We've done all we can to remove it, to disperse it, and yet it remains there. Jiraiya himself checked the seal, and found that nothing was wrong. He theorizes that it may simply be an obscure part of the seal activating to allow Naruto to better access and control the Kyuubi's chakra, but doubts it. Then what do we do? Koharu asked of them. We cannot afford to leave him like this, nor is there an easy solution to this problem. Open banishment. Homura's voice cuts through the air, silencing everyone in the room. We do our best to seal off his chakra. Temporary or permanent, the important thing is that it lasts for some time. We use his condition as an excuse to remove him from the shinobi ranks, and keep up the story that he's in the South Ward. You, Tsunade, have it set up so that he's isolated, that way no one comes trying to visit him. From what I've heard, Naruto has already done the correct actions required to place him in permanent isolation. A team of Anbu is selected to escort Uzumaki, unconscious, on the far edge of the Land of Fire. Homura continued to the group, whom gave him their rapt attention. He will be given nothing but several scrolls. One explaining his situation, a second one will hold maps of the elemental nations, including the locations of the hidden villages, with the sole exception of Konoha. The last one is something Hiruzen wanted Naruto to have when he reached 13, and had hoped to bequeath to Naruto personally. It holds an edited account of his mother, telling him everything with the sole exception of his father and her status as the Kyuubi's second Jinchuriki. And how is that a good solution? Danzo questioned, for once appearing to side with Tsunade, as she also asked that question. The open banishment allows us to remove him until such a time that he is back to his former self. When that happens we simply have the toads summon him. That won't be happening. Jiraiya stated that Naruto's somehow been removed from the contract as their summoner. He thinks that it may be a part of his condition, but the removal of a summoner from any of the summons is unprecedented. Tsunade explained. Then we'll have Jiraiya set his spy network to keep tabs upon the boy. When he is mentally sound, we'll send to have him return. Homura finished. Keeping tabs on the boy will prove to be a daunting task. Back before he made Genin, he was quite adept at running circles around many of our best in Village Hunter Nin, along with a fair number of our best out Village Hunter Nin. Danzo stated. Don't underestimate Jiraiya's network, Tsunade said. Don't underestimate the Uzumaki boy. Danzo countered. So we are in agreement. Koharu butted in. Uzumaki Naruto will be removed from the shinobi ranks and placed into open banishment, with South Ward isolation being the official story. Agreed, Homura stated. Agreed, Danzo commented. They looked at Tsunade, who had a clear goal in mind. Agreed. Oh, Hinata, what are you doing here? Iruka was on his way to the hospital when he found his former student at the front desk, asking if Naruto had been moved. I was just checking to see if there was any change in Naruto's location. She meekly replied, and Iruka wondered if the blonde genin had gained some clue about Hinata's crush on him. Leaving that thought for another time, he simply smiled and asked that she lead the way. The room was exactly the same, with the sole exception that Naruto's mouth had a gag in it, placed in such a way that it didn't hinder his breathing. Iruka was shocked to see his favorite former student in such a horrible state, that he immediately ran over to remove the gag, not noticing the red eyes or the hungry look that Naruto was giving him. He was barely able to dodge Naruto's jaw as it snapped shut where his hand had been not even a second before. Naruto, what? Iruka wasn't able to finish his sentence as he finally noticed the crimson eyes glaring at him. Iruka-sensei. The smile Naruto was giving him was fundamentally the same as his usual toothy smile, but it was completely different. Can you please untie me? The doctors here won't accept that I'm fine. Iruka almost believed it, as that was expected behavior of Naruto, but had enough common sense to give the right answer. Sorry Naruto, but you gotta. Iruka was cut off by Naruto's sudden outburst. Untie me, you sorry excuse for a ninja. Naruto screamed, shocking the Chunin, and making Hinata let out a small eep, which brought her to his attention. He immediately went back to his overly polite self, as though the outburst had never happened. Hinata, I didn't see you there? Can you untie me? He gave her the sad eyes and she almost complied. Almost. I apologize, and Naruto, but, and then he snapped once more. For fuck's sake, you god's awful woman. Get your pansy ass over here and untie me right now. His voice didn't rise like before, but it wasn't exactly forthcoming, either. She didn't move from her spot as Iruka started to realize just why Naruto had been gagged. Did I stutter? No, wait, you'd definitely hear me if I'd stuttered. Just lick KUOU. His voice became horribly mocking, and it brought Hinata to tears. Naruto, there's something wrong with you. It was a pure statement of fact, nothing more, nothing less. Of course there's something wrong with me. It's that I'm not feeling your heart in my hands as I squeeze the last dregs of life out of it. That I'm not doing my damned best to make that thing next to you beg me to kill it. He started going off on a rant about how unfair it was that they wouldn't let him do as he pleased, and Iruka couldn't take any more of it. He swiftly moved forward, pinning Naruto's head to the bead with his left hand as he reattached the gag with his right. Iruka left Naruto's room feeling nothing but grief that the child that he'd once taken a liking to had become this monster. With him was an openly sobbing Hyuga Hinata. That was the last time anyone Naruto knew from Konoha would see him for years. The banishment itself was a rather silent affair. Tsunade had injected Naruto with a tranquilizer, so he was sufficiently suited for his banishment. The Anbu team that had been assembled had been given a backpack holding several days' worth of clothing, some flint, a half-dozen kunai, a small tarp and the agreed-upon scrolls. Jiraiya had come and sealed up Naruto's chakra, stating that they should include the information about his chakra being sealed in the explanatory scroll. He'd also said that the seal would only last 2-3 days max. And then the time came. Naruto was slung over the shoulder of one of the Anbu, whose mask looked feline in nature. The man, who had short brown hair, simply nodded to his team, took one last look at the village from the gates, and left. As they traveled under the moonlight, one of the feline-masked ANBU's subordinates noticed the string of a necklace break as they moved, and picked it up as it fell. The necklace was simple, appearing to be a geometric cylinder of jade between two tiny bells. She pocketed the necklace to give to the Hokage when they returned. Finally, after several hours of moving as fast as they could, they stopped near the border between the Land of Fire and the Land of Wind. The Anbu who had pocketed the necklace watched as her commander set down the boy and checked to make sure that everything that he was to be left with was in order. She also suspected that he'd marked where they were on the map of the elemental nations that the boy was to be left. A small consolation, it seemed, as soon after they left. Several hours later, Blue Eyes opened to view the sky above. Alone, the sun was shining low in the sky, framing the morning mist beautifully. The mist shimmered in the air, making all the colors appear brighter. The wood of the trees, the leaves on the branches, the dirt on the ground, all of it shined brighter by the mysterious work of the mist and sun. Bird began chirping happily at the sight, greeting the day and their animal neighbors. All of it proved to make a single point. Today was going to be a beautiful day. Bright. That was the first thing that came to mind for Naruto. The second thought was ow. Thinking hurt, his hearing hurt, everything hurt. Idly, he figured that this must be what Tsunade feels when she had a hangover, and immediately vowed that he would never be loud around her the next time Shizune said she had a hangover. And then he remembered, and the hangover was gone in an instant. No, 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 no. He cried out, sitting up suddenly. He opened his eyes and looked around, confused and scared. He first noticed his clothes, a simple beige t-shirt with dirt brown pants. On his feet were open-toed boots, which were only the slightest bit big on him. In fact, everything he was wearing was kinda baggy on his lithe frame. The second thing he noticed was his location. It was a small meadow, surrounded by thick, lush beech trees. The branches arched out, giving the meadow some cover from the elements. In all, it was a perfect spot for anyone to camp out at. The third and final thing he noticed was the backpack near him, but it was almost ignored when his hangover came back with a vengeance. "Gah," was the only thing that he could say as he clutched his head in his hands, pulling on his hair and bending into the fetal position in response to the pain. He pushed the pain back out of sheer willpower, and was almost too exhausted to crawl over to the backpack and dump its contents onto the ground. Inside were several pairs of the same clothes he was wearing, along with an equal number of— Naruto blushed when he noticed— boxers. Is that silk? After he forced the clothes back inside the backpack, he found that there was a trio of scrolls, 2 addressed to him. He opened the unaddressed one first, finding that it was a map of the elemental nations, with a single mark upon it. It took him a few minutes to make the realization. That was his location. The map also showed the locations of important trade routes and the towns they crossed through, even going so far as to include the locations of all of the hidden villages. All, with the sole exception of Konoha. The second scroll he opened had the words, "Read me first," printed upon it. It was a note, and it said this: Uzumaki Naruto. Due to the circumstances surrounding your behavior following the failed mission to retrieve Uchiha Sasuke, I, Senju Tsunade, Godem Hokage of Konohagakure, do hereby remove you from the shinobi ranks and temporarily banish you from Konohagakure proper. Do not attempt any jutsu, as your chakra has been sealed, though the sealer has stated that it shall only last for several days. This means that you will not be considered a missing nin, but it does, however, mean that should you approach Konoha before the banishment is lifted, you shall be imprisoned and tried, with the outcome, should you be found guilty, of death. Naruto thought it was a joke. That they couldn't just leave banish him. Uzumaki Naruto, future Hokage. But he read on, and it slowly dawned on him that it wasn't a joke. I know you won't be happy upon hearing this news, and I know that the outcome of your early return isn't one that I'd ever wish upon you, but your actions have left me with no choice but to condone this solution. I hope you do the right thing and never return to Konoha. The banishment shall remain in place until Konoha is in need of your services once more. In need of his services. What, did they simply think that he was some kind of tool for them to use at their leisure? He read on, his disbelief growing. You have been left with some clothes, a map of the elemental nations and scroll that Sarutobi-sensei had wanted to give to you when you turned 13 concerning information that he wanted you to know. It was probably the old man's way of telling him about the fox, Naruto snorted. Old man Sandame had always preferred not to give bad news in person, and told him so back when Naruto had first been given his apartment. He'd argued that if you weren't there in person to give the bad news, then how could you console them? The old man has simply chuckled at Naruto's antics, and replied that the news he had to give wasn't one that could be softened by being there to console them. Naruto went back to reading. Good luck on your journey. I desperately hope you don't hate us by the time I send for you. Senju Tsunade, Densetsu no Sanin, Godem Hokage, Konohagakure no Sato. Lady Hokage, the mission you've set us out on has been completed. Tora, the Anbu who had carried Naruto to the edge of the land of fire, reported. Tsunade nodded, and dismissed all but Tora, so that he could debrief her on the details. Neko, however, stayed. Is there a reason you've not left, Neko? Tora inquired, sounding as though he was using his spook face. Neko stood firm and inclined her head in the affirmative. Now, Tenzo. You both are standing in my presence, so you don't have to refer to each other by your code names right now. Tsunade said, looking from one to the other as they removed their masks. So, what do you have to report, Yugo? The purple-haired woman stepped forward, giving a small bow of respect before starting. During the transport, she held out the necklace, fell from the cargo. It was a testament to Yugo's professionalism that she was able to talk about an actual person as though they were an object. Tsunade looked at the object Yugo handed out, and her breath caught in her throat. The necklace, she thought, dreading what it meant for Naruto. The last time it had returned to her possession, Dan had died right in front of her eyes. She reached out and grabbed the necklace, thanking Yugo before putting it on once more. Did I do the right thing? Naruto had spent the better part of an hour ranting to himself about the unjustness of it all. Then he packed up everything, taking note of what wasn't mentioned in the scroll. He had a half-dozen kunai, several yards of ninja wire and an equal length of rope, flint and a canteen full of water. A search of the area revealed the existence of a river several meters from the meadow. He'd have searched further, but without his chakra to bolster his stamina, he couldn't travel further than roughly half a kilometer before he started to feel exhausted. Is this how the civilians feel when they try to do what ninja do? Naruto wondered as he collapsed back into the clearing after having run there from the river, gasping for breath. He'd tried to catch a fish, but hadn't succeeded, and now was paying the price of having overdone it. I'll definitely be more careful with my chakra when I get it back, if this is what it feels like to be a civilian. Lying down, Naruto took a moment to get his breath back, and took stock of his unearthly stamina that he had taken for granted. After a few minutes, Naruto had gotten his second wind, and was more careful with it now that he'd known what would happen if it was wasted like the first time. He took 2 of the kunai, pocketed them, adjusted them so that they wouldn't cut off his bits if he made the wrong move, and walked around the perimeter of the clearing, picking up stray twigs, even occasionally breaking some of the lower hanging branches off of the trees. Soon, he had a good enough pile to start a small fire, for when it came time to do so, and placed them back near the backpack. He then started to dig a small pit in the middle of the clearing with one of the kunai, making a depression about a foot deep and 2 around. He lined the depression with rocks a little bigger than his fist, officially marking the depression as a fire pit. He stood up, stretching his back out to diffuse the pain of having been in a stooping position for just over an hour when his stomach rumbled, loud and hard. Looking down in shock at the sound, Naruto suddenly realized just how hungry he was, and swore that he could feel his stomach shrink in on itself, and the empty pit that it left in his body because of that was most unsettling. Taking a look at the sun's position in the sky, he figured it was almost noon, and decided to try his hand at catching a fish. Standing at the edge of the river with a kunai in hand, he made the cross-shaped hand sign and made to pull on his chakra. Only for nothing to happen. Oh, right, no chakra, no jutsu. Naruto embarrassedly, and soberly, thought, as he began to rethink his plan to catch lunch. And so, Naruto found himself standing in the middle of the river an hour later. A test of patience, something he'd quickly found himself lacking. And yet, as he stood there, he couldn't help but reach an almost zen-like state of mind, in doing so nearly missed the halibut that was swimming towards him. His arm went up, he struck. The fish scattered at the sudden intrusion, and the halibut was grazed by Naruto's fingers as they attempted to snatch it. Damn it, he muttered, as a hunger cramp struck. Now he had to wait another hour. His stomach loudly grumbled in protest. It was around 2 in the afternoon when Naruto finally caught several good-sized trout. He strung them up and brought them back to his camp, tired and hungry as hell, but smiling up a storm. Once he made it back to camp, he moved to simply set the string of fish down, before frowning. He didn't want to have to trek back to the river to clean up the fish before frying them, nor did he want to waste the water in his canteen. Looking around, he suddenly remembered one of the lessons they taught at the academy. Back before he'd taken the genin test the first time, there had been a wilderness survival class, and one of the things it taught was how to set your food so that forest predators couldn't get at it. Glancing at the trees around him, he found a branch about 15 feet up that looked strong enough for his needs. Tying the end of the rope to a kunai, Naruto tossed in the air, where it flew above the branch before coming down the other side. Jumping up and snagging the kunai out of the air, he started pulling on the rope, hoisting the fish string up about 10 feet before tying the end off at the base of the tree. Satisfied, Naruto gave himself a small nod of approval before setting about building the fire. Why on earth didn't they leave me a damn first aid kit? Naruto thought and grumbled angrily, digging through the pockets of the backpack with his left hand. He'd accidentally burned his right hand when the fire had suddenly picked right up, the flames hitting 3 of his fingers and the back of his hand, which was currently wrapped in the excess of his shirt. Finally, he found a small first aid kit in a side pocket, letting out a small, aha, of joy. He set about finding the burn cream. Once his hand had some cream on it, with a light wrapping of gauze to keep it from getting inflamed worse than it was, he lowered the fish, undid one of the 5-pounders he'd gotten, then raised the fish back up where he'd left them before beheading and skinning the one he'd taken down for lunch. Skewering the fish, he held it close to the fire to cook quickly, keeping a sharp eye on it. To Naruto, fish had never tasted so delicious. The rest of the day had been fairly slow, with Naruto resting up before eating dinner. He never knew just how much of a ninja's stamina came from their chakra, but that day was a startling reminder of just how big the difference between a civilian and a shinobi was. Naruto was humbled at how big a gap it was, and was thankful that the academy had also worked on physical development as well as chakra development, otherwise he might have been screwed in setting up his encampment. Getting up, all his muscles started burning in pain, and the burn of his hand flared up. The combined pain nearly sent him into unconsciousness, but it wasn't as bad as the pain he'd had that morning. Thankfully, his body had gotten used to working without his chakra rather quickly, or else he'd still be in the fetal position moaning in pain. Stretching, Naruto stopped when it made the pain worse. Groaning, he shuffled over to the rope, letting the fish string down again as the sun went down. Picking the lone 7-pounder out of the 5 remaining fish, Naruto set it aside as he pulled the fish string back up the tree, feeling a twinge of pain each time his right hand took hold of the rope and pulled. After eating dinner, Naruto sat down, looking at the map of the elemental nations he'd been left. Noting his position, he figured that if he went east, he'd pass through the land of birds and enter the land of wind. Hopefully, he'd then find a Sunanin that was returning to Sanagakure and follow them. From there, he'd locate Gaara and figure out his plan from there. Nodding to himself at the ingeniousness of it all, he put out the fire, letting the clearing only be lit by the low light of the moon, before laying his head upon the backpack and going to sleep. The wolves moved swiftly, the smell of rotting fish guiding them towards their destination. Nothing would stop them from getting their meal. Nothing. It was the howling that woke Naruto up. And it was the barking, the unstopping barking, that made him start to panic. Wolves? He had no chakra, so it was kind of pointless to scare them off. But, if he could fight them, drive them away, then they wouldn't return, which was better than simply scaring them off. He sat up, pulling out a pair of kunai and holding them in a reverse grip in both hands. Let them come. I'll fight them off, he arrogantly thought. I hope. The howling and barking came closer and closer, the noises sounding more and more vicious and euphoric. And then they stopped. The silence filled the air, and all that could be heard was Naruto's heavy breathing. There was a slight shuffling sound as Naruto turned his head and torso around, trying to find where the wolves would first strike. He froze before twisting around, the kunai in his hand making a slight whistle in the air as he swung his arm around him, hitting nothing but air. His breathing became heavier, more ragged. If anyone could see him, they'd find his eyes darting around, his demeanor becoming frantic. And the wolves struck. Naruto was hit from the left, feeling teeth brush past his arm, hearing the snap the jaw made as it clamped shut, missing his arm by mere hairs. He twisted his arm to strike as the wolf's strike had knocked him to the ground, but was met with claws that held his arm down as Naruto felt hot breath descend upon his arm. Reacting the fastest he'd been since he'd woken up, Naruto slammed the butt of the kunai in his right hand into the face of the wolf that was about to devour his left arm. The wolf shrunk back from the blow, though not by much, but it had been enough for Naruto to pull his arm out from under the wolf's forepaws, garnering several gashes for his effort. He went up on one knee, panting from the effort, as the other wolves descended upon the encampment. Shit, Naruto ground out. The first attack set the mood for the entire affair. Naruto was blindsided by two as the rest ransacked the encampment, digging up the fish heads and skin he'd buried before ravaging them into nothing. Naruto swung, hitting home with the shoulder of one of the wolves, sending it limping back, and was immediately set upon by two more in its wake. They ripped into him, and he was barely able to hold his own. Every injury he made on them, they doubled on him, until he was bleeding and backed into the tree that held the string of fish. As the pack moved to finish Naruto off, he undid the knot keeping the fish string in the air, letting the half-dozen fall to the ground amidst the wolf pack, which quickly forgot about Naruto. He grabbed the backpack, which had a few holes in it but was pretty much intact along with everything in it, and crawled away. He crawled, and kept crawling until the wolf pack had become snarls in the distance. And then he collapsed on the ground, sobbing. He was well and truly alone here, with no help coming. And Konoha had left him here to die. He fell asleep crying, the snarling of the wolves becoming dimmer and dimmer as the night progressed. The land of birds. Naruto woke up in the middle of a forest. His face covered with dirt, dried blood and streaked with clear lines signifying the tracks his tears had taken to the ground. He sat up, and immediately began to regret it. All across his body were bruises from being thrown around, cuts where the wolves had latched onto him with the claws on their paws, and gashes from the few times that the beasts had bitten him. Reaching into the backpack, which he'd clearly taken as a makeshift pillow, if the dark spots where his eyes had been was any indication, Naruto pulled out the first aid kit. He began sloppily placing antiseptic on all the wounds, hissing at the pain of the sterilization, before applying healing cream and doing his best to cover the wounds with all of his bandages and gauze. Naruto missed the way he'd always healed fast, and immediately a glimpse of a memory, one where his Jonin-sensei had bandaged his hand after he'd stabbed his hand with a kunai to draw out the poison, flashed through his mind. And Naruto was crying once more, wishing for his life back. Wishing that he was back in Konoha, having lunch with Iruka while recounting his day of training and D-rank missions. Wishing that he was in the Hokage's office, being scolded by a drunken Tsunade for interrupting her while she was getting the day's filing done. But he couldn't be there. He wasn't there, because they'd banished him, and the tears flowed anew as Naruto laid on the ground, holding his knees close with his arms, and cried into them. "Excuse me, but could you please tell me where Uzumaki Naruto's room is? I stopped by the room he was in before, but it was empty." Iruka asked the receptionist at the desk. Even though he'd had to stay with Hinata for the past day, and even called upon her team and cousin to comfort the girl who'd been belittled by her soon-to-be ex-crush, Iruka would still visit Naruto, if only to remind himself of the boy he once knew, who had disappeared at the end of his last mission and left that thing behind. It hurt to think in those kinds of terms, to call Naruto a thing, but there was no other way to describe him. Iruka had extended the offer to join him in visiting Naruto, but all of his friends had declined. It appeared that they had been hurt by Naruto just like Hinata, and could not bring themselves to face him again. "Yes, he's been moved into permanent isolation in the South Ward. No visitors," the receptionist told the kind-hearted Chunin. "What? Why?" Iruka started to panic inside. What did that thing do? Was the painful thought going through his mind? Uzumaki had been attacking everyone he saw. One doctor even had to have surgery to reattach one of his fingers along with part of his hand. It was concluded that it was all the non-essential personnel he'd regularly come into contact with that was making him so dangerous, and the Godem herself approved his move into the isolation hall of the South Ward. The Godem herself approved this? If Iruka was shocked at the isolation, he was floored by the fact that Tsunade, who was practically a mother figure to Naruto, had condoned his isolation. Though perhaps it was because she's like his mother that she did this. All Iruka knew was that he now had to seek audience with the Godem, and find out if she put Naruto in isolation for his own safety, or for the safety of others. Naruto cried until he couldn't cry anymore. And then he simply lay there, feeling nothing but the slowly dimming pain of his wounds. One thought kept running through his mind, repeating itself like some kind of perverse mantra, never letting it get forgotten to anything else. They left me. Konoha had abandoned him. His friends, the ones he'd alienated, had left him. He remembered everything. Every word, every action, everything. And he had no regrets about anything he said. No remorse, nothing. He tried to feel something for alienating his friends like that, but no matter what he did, he simply felt nothing. Naruto didn't notice when he'd fallen back asleep, nor did he stir when a shadow moved over his form. "Why did you lock up Naruto?" Iruka cut straight to the matter at hand. He knew that simply ignoring all pretenses would be immensely disrespectful, but there was a time and a place for such niceties, and this situation was neither the time nor the place. Not when it involved Naruto. He attacked anyone who he came into contact with, verbally and, when he could, physically. The sensible decision was to limit all contact with the outside world. Tsunade explained, and Iruka had the faintest of impressions that it was rehearsed, but tossed it aside as one of those things medical professionals do. "That's not what I meant, and you know it. It isn't that Iruka doesn't respect the position of Hokage or those that hold it, simply that his fondness for the lovable blonde went further than his sense of duty and honor." Tsunade sighs, as if she expected this, and he has to wonder if the Godem had expected something like this to happen. "Amino, please call me Iruka, Lady Hokage." His curt interruption made for a split second of awkward silence before she continued as though there was not interruption at all. "Iruka," she began again, fixing him with a stern look. "I would not lock Naruto away if I didn't think it was just as much for his safety as the safety of the public, but in this case, they are one and the same. Naruto's become too dangerous to be around just anyone, and his behavior hasn't helped. If anything, it's made it all the more clear that he needs the isolation more than anything else. This gave Iruka pause, as he hadn't expected such an answer, but the idea seemed unbelievable in his mind. Naruto being locked up for his own sake as well as the sake of the villagers? Why, oh, right. While the public that knew of Naruto's Jinchuriki status did not like him, nor did they act against him. Iruka heard that Naruto hadn't really been treated any better than the other orphans, but that didn't mean that he had been treated any worse than the others. And it was really only the parents fearing for their children's safety that they didn't let him play with others his age. The most they had done was treat him with indifference, to the point where it had appeared that everyone hated him. Iruka nodded. Do you visit him regularly? The question wasn't all that surprising to Tsunade, and she nodded, making sure he saw the nonverbal answer. Then if you could please tell him that I'm there for him, even if I can't be there in person. He sounded so desperate that she had no choice but to answer in the affirmative. In a side drawer of the Hokage's desk, there sat a necklace of a geometric jade cylinder with tiny bells on either side of it. It lay atop a worn-out Hite 8. Both were waiting for their wielder to return home. When Naruto woke up, the first thing he noticed was that he was in a large cave. The second thing he noticed was that he hadn't brought himself there. The third thing he noticed was that his wounds had been treated, and he was now in a fresh pair of clothes, identical to the previous pair. So you are awake, then? It wasn't voiced as a question, and Naruto didn't think that the gruff voice had meant it to be one. He looked around before setting his eyes upon a small fire burning nearby. How had he not noticed it immediately? He was, like, 3 feet from it, and the hunched form of a person on the opposite him. Yes. Naruto then clutched his throat. His voice it had always been rather rough from having spent all that time yelling at anyone and everyone who would listen, but now it was different. A little deeper, only barely, he sadly noted, but definitely smoother now. Did you carry me here? His voice wasn't all that different, he noted. Fundamentally, he sounded the same, with the exception that it was as though he'd taken a cough drop. Not exactly, was all that the mysterious person replied, and Naruto waited several seconds in silence before realizing that the person wasn't going to say anything else. Naruto sat there in silence with the person, silently rejoicing in the company of another human being, before curiosity got the better of him, making him fidget until he worked up the courage to speak again. Thanks for saving me, I guess. Boy, this was awkward, Naruto thought, as he tried to thank the man. My name's Naruto, by the way. The man shuffled into the light of the fire better, and Naruto's breath caught as he was met with the sight of a cloak. The black cloak, dotted with red clouds. The man set his dead eyes on Naruto, his dark, wood-like skin reflecting slightly in the glow of the fire. My name is Akasuna no Sasori, Kyuubi Jinchuriki. Naruto quickly took hold of the situation, moving to grab his backpack, which he immediately shouldered and ran for the mouth of the cave, only to be stopped by a giant, segmented chain-like thing that, Naruto saw with growing horror, had come from the Akatsuki member himself. Now where are you going so fast, Jinchuriki? Sasori spoke. It is quite rude for one to give their full name and another to simply avoid such niceties. So, if you would please tell me your full name. Uzumaki Naruto, former genin of Konohagakure. He couldn't do anything. He had no chakra, all the kunai were in the backpack, if Sasori hadn't already noticed and removed them. But he'd be damned if he didn't put up a fight, no matter how pointless it would be. Uzumaki Naruto, Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi no Kitsune, the nine-tailed demon fox. He sounded so scared. Sasori chuckled, a grating sound that was not dissimilar to the noise that one makes when they drag a piece of metal across concrete. Good, he said, I just wanted you to confirm it yourself before I took you down. After all, leader would be very unhappy if I brought in the wrong person. And Naruto took it as the best time to make his move. He knew that attaining the mark of S-class meant that you were one of a select few who were the deadliest in all of the elemental nations. That you could take on anyone and come out on top. The only ones that could ostensibly take on an S-class ninja was another S-class ninja or a Kage, and even then it was unknown just who would win. Naruto was neither S-class caliber nor a Kage, nor did he have any chakra to call upon. But that didn't mean that he wasn't gonna go down fighting. Naruto flew forward, sliding across the clacking tail thing that had moved to intercept him, ducked down as a hail of senbon were shot out of Sasori's mouth, obliterating the cloth that hid it from view. Naruto thought that he'd seen some pretty freaked out things in his short time as a ninja, from Orochimaru shedding his skin to Kabuto coming back to life after having his guts turned to dust by Naruto's own hand, but they couldn't really compare to Sasori, as he found out. Sasori's left hand shot out, the blunt wooden hand thing slamming into Naruto, who was propelled further by the sudden explosion of the fingers, launching him into the side of the cave and cracking his already bruised ribs. Naruto got up, clutching his side and coughing up blood. He reached into the backpack, and was overjoyed at finding the kunai where he'd left them. Thank God for small mercies. Holding two between his knuckles like claws, he staggered forward towards Sasori, deflecting the tip of the tail, causing the rest of it to follow as it stuck itself in the ground to the side of Naruto. Sasori tried to yank the tail back towards him, but it didn't respond. Looking at it, he was angered to find that it had been taken down by a single kunai that had been jammed into the mechanism near the body. He growled and removed the Akatsuki cloak, revealing the true form of his outer shell to Naruto, who was much too close for comfort. Sending out chakra strings, he'd been momentarily shocked to find that they hadn't taken hold, as if the Kyuubi Jinchuriki had no chakra. That moment had been all Naruto had needed to slam the remaining kunai in his hand as deep into what he thought had been Sasori's head. And then the chakra strings had taken hold, and Naruto was flung back. Hey, guess you Akatsuki dudes aren't as powerful as you think you are. He smiled and stood up, before grimacing and clutching at his now broken ribs in pain. Damn, the voice made Naruto stop, his eyes wide with fear. He turned towards the dead Sasori, only to watch in horror as a red-headed teen stood up, standing in what Naruto now knew was nothing more than a shell of some kind. You took down Hiriko. I should be impressed by your skill if I didn't know for a fact that you were about to die. The voice was impossibly smoother, but Naruto couldn't mistake it for anyone else. The person standing before him was Akasuna no Sasori, alive, uninjured and quite unhappy. What are you? Naruto was frozen in fear. I already told you. I am Akasuna no Sasori, the greatest puppet master since Chikamatsu Manzaemon. Sasori looked at Naruto. Tell me, did you really believe to have killed me? Naruto said nothing, as fear dominated his body. He was so scared, and he was about to die. He felt some kind of pressure come from inside of his body, pushing against some kind of barrier, and for a second Naruto was scared that it was Kyuubi, using this as the perfect time to turn him back into that bastard white person again. But then he realized that if it really was Kyuubi, then it would feel like a fire, comforting and burning his body simultaneously. This instead felt warm and comforting, like it was something that he'd always had with him, bringing him comforting warmth in the coldest of nights, and cooling him down on the hottest of days. Naruto let it come forth. There was what felt like some sort of wall crumbling, and the barrier shattered. The seal had broken. Naruto's chakra had returned to him. And with it, his unwavering confidence. For a second there, yeah, I kinda did. Naruto's trademark smirk was back in place, and he flexed his fingers, feeling his chakra flow throughout his entire body and fill it with the life he hadn't noticed was missing. But now I'm gonna make sure that you're dead as dust when I'm through with you. And how do you propose to do that? Sasori was reaching into his cloak and removing a scroll from it. After all, you have shown that your skills are not worthy of combating my favorite puppet, and you appear to have had your chakra sealed. Don't underestimate me, Naruto growled, a bit of his old scruffy voice showing through with that single comment. He moved his hands into the familiar cross-shaped hand sign, and brought forth just enough chakra for a half-dozen clones. Normally, he'd call forth an army, but the loss of his chakra had left a lasting impact on him, making him more conservative in terms of chakra usage. A half-dozen shadow clones popped into existence, dividing into groups of two. One from each pair held their right hand out to the side, while the remaining three started moving their hands, aiding in the creation of three individual Rasengan. Sasori simply stared, his eyes half-lidded. He cocked his head slightly, letting his interest in the mechanics of such a jutsu show on his, albeit, emotionless face. An interesting jutsu, but not one that will help you against me. Sasori summoned several puppets and sent them after all the 6 identical blonde teens rushing towards him. The 3 without Rasengans were taken out quite easily, and disappeared in bursts of smoke, but the remaining 3 were able to dispatch of 3 puppets before being taken down with non-fatal wounds meant to incapacitate, as Sasori believed that the real one was among them. And then all 3 dispersed into smoke, and Sasori was left in the cave with nothing to show for his attempt at capturing a Jinchuriki except for 4 damaged puppets and a broken ego. Deidara wasn't gonna drop this failure anytime soon. If Sasori was still human, his one eye would be twitching like mad. Naruto ran, and kept running, west. He didn't stop for several hours, and when he did, it was nearing dusk, and he'd come upon a small town. Panting, and, he was very glad to note, only slightly winded, he went to the nearest house and knocked on the door. The last thing he saw before passing out from his injuries was the face of a red-headed girl a little older than him. When Naruto next woke up, he was shirtless and had a doctor checking over his once broken ribs. Hiriko Shinji, as the doctor was called, was quite odd-looking, in Naruto's opinion. He had teal hair in a bowl cut, and his face reminded Naruto of a goat, for some reason. "Well, I don't know how, but you're almost completely healed," Shinji said as he got up. Looking down at Naruto, Shinji left him with these parting words. "At the rate you're healing, you're free to be on your way by this afternoon." "Wait," Naruto called out, still tired from all he'd been through. "How long have I been out?" "All night. You're really very lucky you'd knocked on Lisa's door. If it had been my house you'd probably still be laying out there." Shinji chuckled to himself as he left the room, leaving Naruto with more questions than answers. Who's Lisa? Yadamaru Lisa, it turned out, was the red-headed girl he'd seen just before collapsing. She had short hair, which she'd apparently just dyed red when Naruto had appeared on her doorstep, and wore wire-framed glasses over violet-gray eyes. She was quite uptight, as Naruto soon found out when he thanked her for taking him in and calling Shinji. "I was simply doing what was needed of me. Now get healing and remove yourself from my life once you're done," was her response. He'd laughed, and then offered to help her however he could. She'd kicked him in the face. The day had come and gone quickly, and Naruto had decided to leave in the morning. He and Lisa had gone over to Shinji's house for dinner, sashimi and rice, which Naruto took to like it was the most delicious thing in the world, confusing Shinji, Lisa and Shinji's daughter, a spunky blonde much like Naruto named Hiyori. They'd had lots of fun, talking about anything and everything, from Shinji explaining the more hilarious exploits of Hiyori trying to attack him whenever he came home to Naruto's prankster exploits back in Konoha. He was surprised to find that, while there was a part of his heart ached when he started talking about the village that had abandoned him, it wasn't as much as it when he'd crawled away from the wolves. The sun lazily appeared in the sky, and it came time for Naruto to be on his way. Lisa, Shinji, Hiyori appeared to see him off, wishing him the best of luck in his journey. "Here," Shinji held out a pouch. "What is it?" Naruto asked as he took the pouch and affixed it upon the waist of his pants. "It's the basic med kit that all medic nin have with them. Since the land of birds doesn't have a ninja village to call its own, the villages have to make do themselves, and prefer not to call upon the aid of the ninja of Suna and Konoha whenever they can. This means that we have to be as self-sufficient as possible, and you'd be surprised at how important these things can be to us, especially in times of war." Shinji explained, and Naruto nodded his head, the patience he'd gained from catching fish by hand making him better at listening to others. Hiyori gave Naruto enough jerky to survive a round-trip trek from Kumo to Suna, and Lisa gave him a book on the elemental nations, which surprised him. He hadn't thought that they really hit it off during his stay there, but he'd been wrong. "Thanks guys, for everything." He just wasn't sure how to properly express his happiness towards them, and Shinji seemed to notice it. Giving Naruto another of his odd smiles. "He looks like a goat so much it's not funny," they bade Naruto a safe journey to Sanagakure. Contrary to popular belief, the Land of Wind was not, in fact, one big desert, as a rather idiotic person said it was. That person also said such idiotic comments like there being no land routes anywhere in the Land of Water, the lands of lightning and earth being entirely made of mountains, and the Land of Fire being a thick forest. That person, Jiraiya of the Sannin, had lived to regret his idiocy in the many years since having answered that question in his academy days. For instance, he hadn't really bothered to learn about the smaller countries, the ones without hidden villages. Foregoing such knowledge, he'd instead preferred to have his contacts, the real spies among his network, deal with those kinds of things, and instead wanted regular information on the 5 hidden villages, including the 3, now 4, lesser villages, Kusa, Taki, Aim and Otto. And it was for that reason the Uzumaki Naruto disappeared off the face of the earth, and he now had to figure out just what to say to Tsunade, who had asked him to provide her with regular updates on how Naruto was faring out in the world. He thought that it would be rather easy. The Gaki, having been left near an often used trade route, would hitch a ride to the nearest town, where Jiraiya was waiting in disguise and would watch Naruto's actions, indirectly interfering if the situation called for it. But then 2 days had passed, and several caravans had come and gone via the route, and none of them had Naruto with them, or reported seeing a small blonde-haired boy with whisker birthmarks. At the end of the second day, Jiraiya had to exercise self-restraint in going to make sure Naruto was okay, instead sending one of his messenger toads to spy on Naruto, and thinking that there wasn't that big of a difference between a civilian and a genin, stamina-wise. Oh, if he only knew. What do you mean, you can't find him? Tsunade's angry, strained voice hits him almost as bad as one of her punches, and he flinches back as though she had hit him. I mean, he wasn't found by any of the caravans, and when I went to see where he'd been left, it was home to a wolf pack. Tsunade looked tired and stressed beyond belief. There were obvious signs that he'd stayed there. In the middle of the clearing was a fire pit, and the wolves appeared to have dug up the remains of several fish. Looked like the Gaki had gone fishing, by hand probably, and the smell of the fish attracted the wolves. I tried to find him, but there wasn't anything that could be tracked. The toads can't track by scent. He's left nothing to indicate where he's gone, and having his chakras sealed makes it impossible to find him through that means. I hate to say it, but it appears that the Gaki has gone off the grid, however intentional or not it was. Tsunade got out of her seat, went around the desk and clutched Jiraiya's vest in both hands, lifting him off of the ground. Then find him. I want to know everything, where he is, what he's doing, who he's with. Everything, she growled, her eyes red with tears unshed. The sun beat down hard upon Naruto, and he looked around him, finding that it was only slightly cooler in the shadow of the patch of forest he was in. Pulling out the map, he looked over it, judging how far he'd traveled in the past week. It had been a week since he'd left the small town of Karakura in the land of birds, and since then he'd been running non-stop, using the sun's location to head in the right direction. He hoped. Looking down at the map of the land of wind, he found that he should have reached Sanagakure by now, given its location relative to Karakura. Urahara made Rose seem normal, Naruto idly noted, as his mind had all but shut down once he'd met the guy in charge of verifying passports. He wore a dark green shirt with matching shorts, a green and white bucket hat over his short pale blonde hair, geta and a black coat with a white diamond pattern on the bottom. However, that was probably the most normal thing about him. He carried around a cane for no reason that Naruto could see, as he darted about his office without so much as a hint of a limp, and kept asking Naruto the oddest of questions. What's your favorite day of the week? Do you prefer dogs or cats? What word do you think is the funniest to say? What's your favorite hour of the day? And didn't really give Naruto a chance to answer any of them. And if that didn't cement that this Urahara guy was insane, then the fact that he'd introduced Naruto to his best friend, a black cat, sent him over the top, in Naruto's opinion. The second Naruto had his passport stamped and approved, he shouldered his pack, made sure he had everything he needed on him, and started running the second he had a good hold on the passport. He hadn't really stopped running since. And now he was lost. Great, he thought, now what am I gonna do? Gaara had been sent to perform a once-ever of the forest outside of Suna, and hadn't expected to find anything. If he was to be completely honest, which, he figured, he was, with anyone who asked, he would answer that he rather liked border patrol. The quiet was a big difference in comparison to the people all muttering about him. He'd never really liked being around other people, as it had made the crazed mutterings of the tanuki within him turn into blood-crazed screams to kill them all. And so, Baki, as acting case cage until either a proper one could be found or the council voted him the Godem, sent Gaara on city border patrol. So far, he hadn't run into anybody, and was descending into a state of mind he had never been in. Is this what they mean when they say that they feel zen? Were some of the thoughts that ran through his mind as he considered the oddity that was this calm. Even the tanuki was being rather silent, which would normally have made him freak out, but the zen mind he believed himself to be in made him simply choose to enjoy it. A look of peace adorned Gaara's face as he slowly walked along the ground, under the shade of the forest. And then someone nearby started cursing, and Gaara's moment of zen was gone. Naruto looked at the map, and by his calculations, he should be in the middle of Suna. Damn it, he cried out, before turning that single sentence into a mantra. The mantra continued until he was picked up and thrown into a tree. Sand curled around him, pinning him to the tree, and would have crushed him had he not realized just who had found him. Who are you and why have you interrupted my zen? Gaara sounded somewhat unsure about it actually being zen, and his uncertainty showed. Gaara? Naruto appeared jubilant, before what Gaara said sank in. He quirked an eyebrow and said, quite disbelievingly, did you say, zen? Uzumaki. Gaara regarded, and the sand returned to his gourd. To answer your question, I was feeling exceedingly peaceful, I think, is the correct term for it, before you made your presence known. Now tell me, why are you here? Naruto paused, trying to find the logic in Gaara being zen, failing, and finally answering by handing Gaara the scroll written by Tsunade. Gaara stared at the scroll, before Naruto prompted him to open and read it. His eyes narrowed, and Naruto had to physically stop him from going to the acting case cage and requesting that he be sent back to Konoha. Gaara simply responded that it was rather stupid to have banished their strongest ninja, to which Naruto sighed and explained just where he ranked in power. Gaara had appeared confused, at least Naruto hoped that it was confused on his face, and not him about to go batshit again. He almost said as much, but decided not to. Sometimes it was better not to say anything than be completely open and honest with someone. Especially when that someone could kill you into dust, literally, without batting an eye. He sighed. This is going to be a long day. Jiraiya stood at the passport verification process in Karakura, dodging all sorts of strange questions from the pale blonde man in front of him. At first, he'd simply been trying to get his passport stamped so he could enter the country, but he'd hit a bit of a snag with the crazy pale blonde-haired man in front of him. After answering all the questions he could, he was about to get his passport stamped when the man had made the connection that he wrote the Icha Icha series. The man then went and announced it on the PA system. Apparently, a lot of the people there were big fans, and bullied him into autographing anything and everything that they could get signed. And he meant everything. He shuddered. Sometimes, he hated being the writer of a famed series. Hey, Gaara. Could you not tell anyone I'm here? Naruto's smooth voice cut through the air as he and Gaara walked back to Suna. Why? Because I'm not sure if Konoha has warned the case cage about me. Gaara looked at Naruto. I am sure that whatever you did was not so bad that the entire elemental nations would be after you. Gaara's reply was swift and filled with somewhat flawed logic. I know, but, have you ever heard of the Akatsuki? Naruto stopped with Gaara and looked at his auburn-haired friend. I have not. Well, they're this group of S-class ninja, and they're after us. Gaara's head tilted slightly. Us? What we hold? Naruto could not have been clearer. I was not under the impression that we held anything. Naruto's eyes started twitching. Has he never heard of subtle? And then he remembered who he was talking to, and sighed. You have the Ichibi no Shukaku sealed within you. I have the Kyuubi no Kitsune sealed within me. Gaara's eyes widened, and something akin to panic spread throughout his entire being. The Tanuki inside him had gone deathly silent, and this time Gaara didn't know if it was good or bad that such a thing had happened. And the Akatsuki want to take them from us. That does not sound good. Gaara stated in his usual blunt demeanor. And you are sure that they are after us? Positive. Naruto confirmed with a grim look upon his face. I got abducted by one of them back in the land of birds. His name was what was it? It was like a kind of insect. Sasori. That was his name. Akasuna no Sasori. I have heard that name before. Kankuro has expressly stated that this Sasori is the greatest puppet master to have ever existed, and hopes to one day surpass him in the puppet arts. Gaara responds. I assume that there are others in this Akatsuki? Yeah, at least 2 others, a tall fish man from Kiri. Kisame, I think his name is. And Uchiha Itachi, Sasuke's older brother. Naruto answers, then looks at Gaara. You said your brother knows this Sasori. Think he can tell us? Gaara paused, and then continued back to Suna, Naruto following behind him. As you have stated, I have people who wish to protect me, and since our battle I have been trying to make it up to them, I believe is the phrase. Gaara took a second to find the right words to best explain to the upbeat wait. Gaara made the sudden realization that Uzumaki Naruto was not the same person he had fought months ago. Thinking over previous encounters with Uzumaki, Gaara had come to know the blonde as loud, brash, open and prone to acting before thinking. Now, however, the Uzumaki Naruto he had been talking to was almost counterpoint to the Uzumaki he knew. Calm, quieter, closed off, though not too much, and appeared to be thinking before acting. Naruto looked at Gaara, trying to get the attention of the, hopefully, reformed psychopath in the best way that wouldn't end with his life in danger. In short, he was asking Gaara why he'd stopped walking and was just staring out into space. Gaara snapped back to reality and chose to ignore Naruto's incessant questioning of what he'd been thinking of, instead continuing to Suna. Naruto figured that it wasn't something he should know and followed along. Jiraiya wasn't sure if it was fate of the good kind or fate of the bad kind that had him watching as every single one of his fans in Karakura told him of their own attempts to recreate the scenes in his books, complete with visual aids and everything. Maybe there was something to be said for rabid fans, Jiraiya noted as he watched on, listening to various people comment on their own personal variations, like Ichimaru Jin and his lover Matsumoto Reinaku attempting the legendary scene from Icha Icha Violence. Granted, he was strapped to a chair with no hope of escape, but still. Maybe there was something to this whole roleplay thing. Entering Suna was simple. Naruto and Gaara had approached the gauntlet that was the only entrance in and out. The guards had been apprehensive until Gaara had given them his death glare and said that Naruto was with him. Needless to say, they'd let the pair through, and now Gaara had to endure Naruto berating him for acting so harshly. I'm just saying, had you been a little nicer, he'd have checked my papers and we would have been free to do what we wanted here. Not on our way to the Cage's office to make sure the guy knows I'm here. Naruto rolled his eyes. Besides, why do you want to let him know anyway? It would be idiotic to not let him know you are here, and I see no reason not to inform him. Gaara was stopped by Naruto gripping his shoulders briefly before pulling back as the sand beneath his feet started encompassing his legs. Gaara, Naruto began, serious face in place. I don't want anyone knowing I'm here. Barely anybody knew I was in the woods on the edge of the land of birds, and yet Akatsuki found me. I don't want to bring them here. To you. I can take care of myself. Gaara replied, and made the sand recede from Naruto's legs. Can you really hold your own against a group of people so powerful that just one of them alone can meet one of the Cage on equal grounds? 'Cause I was lucky in being able to escape, and don't think I'll be capable of taking any of them on anytime soon. Naruto responded, looking at the back of his friend as Gaara walked through the gauntlet towards Suna. And I was able to meet you on equal ground, Gaara. As we are, we're only Chunin level at best, and not even the most skilled of Chunin can take on a Cage and hope to win. That got Gaara's attention, as he stopped and looked back at Naruto. Then what do you propose we do? Naruto shook his head, and quietly answered, I honestly don't know. Do what we can and train. Become stronger so that we can at least go down fighting, I guess. The two looked at each other, gauging their options, when Gaara suddenly turned and started walking again. If we are to defend ourselves, then we must know as much as we can about our enemy. Gaara spoke. Come, we shall seek out Kankuro and learn all about this Akasuna no Sasori. Sanagakure wasn't all that different from Konoha, Naruto noticed, as he walked down the street towards the housing where Gaara and his siblings were staying at. The wary glances, looks of fear and anger were also all too familiar to Naruto, and he felt that he could sympathize with Gaara somewhat. Granted, all he had going for himself was being treated with total apathy, but he could definitely remember the people looking at him in fear and hatred when they thought he wasn't looking, whispering vile things about him when they thought he couldn't hear. Gaara, meanwhile, had to murder his uncle, who had wormed his way into his heart and then ripped it out before having to fend off the countless assassination attempts made by his own father. And it was in that moment that Naruto reached an understanding of Gaara nobody else could ever hope to achieve. Gaara had been forced to become the tool his father had wanted of him, and in doing so almost lost his mind. Almost lost his humanity. Looking around, Naruto saw the truth of Suna. He saw things that he'd seen in the Land of Waves shops with little to sell, people out on the street begging for food, money, safe housing. He saw the empty shops, the high prices, the look of desperation in the eyes of everyone in sight, even the ninja. And it was then that he truly knew just how vastly different each of the hidden villages were. Back when he was young and just learning about the many hidden villages, he thought that all of them were just as big and bustling as Konoha. Oh, how wrong he'd been. Suna clearly wasn't as bustling as Konoha, and given that they'd only been walking for not even 5 minutes, and were already at the Cage's mansion in the middle of the village, Suna wasn't nearly as large as Konoha. Gaara led Naruto inside, and went directly towards the living quarters. "You live here?" Naruto was in awe. He'd never been in the part of the Hokage's residence that they'd actually lived at, but he'd never thought in his wildest dreams that they'd live so luxuriously. "Yes," was Gaara's succinct answer. "Kankuro's room resides down this way, and he can usually be found in there improving his puppets." Naruto almost wanted to ask how Gaara knew that, but decided once again that there were some things about Gaara that he'll never understand. They approached the simple door, white against the beige walls, and knocked. Kankuro appeared to almost have a heart attack when he opened his door and saw Gaara standing there with the blonde Konoha nin who'd defeated Gaara. "May we come in?" Gaara politely asked. And that was another thing that had been changed about Gaara. He was using manners, asking if something he was about to do was okay or wanting to know their opinion on something that seemed entirely trivial to anyone else. Kankuro and Tamari weren't sure if he was trying to be nicer or if he was simply acting that way just to see them freak out. Yes. Kankuro certainly wasn't about to deny Gaara something he clearly wanted to do or know. He stepped back and let the duo in. Kankuro's room was almost exactly like Naruto imagined it to be. There was a bed in the far corner, and to the side of it was a bookshelf filled with various scrolls. Probably on puppetry, Naruto thought. On the wall opposite of the bed, there was a dresser with a vanity mirror atop it, and Naruto had to prevent himself from bursting out laughing at the array of makeup products lying out atop it. Scattered on the floor were various gears and puppet parts. "Looks like Gaara was right," Naruto noted. "Look, we need to keep this whole visit thing quiet, and the both of us would really appreciate it if you didn't tell anyone that we were here." Naruto spoke for the first time since commenting on the grand scale of the mansion, and his comment was driven home by the dark look Gaara was giving Kankuro, who nodded. "So, what do you know about Akasuna no Sasori?" Sasori was the greatest puppet master to ever exist after the creator of the puppet techniques, Chikamatsu Manzaemon. He was the first person capable of controlling more than 10 puppets at a single time, though he never told anyone just how he did it, and was made famous for using 100 puppets to obliterate a single fortress during a raid several years before the Sandaime Cage went missing and the Third Great Shinobi World War began. Kankuro explained, "Outside of the fact that he's the only known user of human puppets, no one knows what else he can do." "Human puppets?" Naruto asked. It's said that Sasori was the first person to ever use living humans as puppets, and there are rumors that he'd been taking the bodies of people he'd defeated and turning them into actual puppets, though there is no proof to either of those claims, so the only people who could definitively say such a thing are the two elders Chiyo and Ebizu, and Sasori himself. Quote, "Is it possible to meet with either of those elders?" Gaara inquired, and Kankuro shrugged. "I highly doubt it. Word is, both of them went crazy years ago, and spend all their time playing pranks on anyone they come across, even themselves." Kankuro said, "And even then, I don't think you can get anything out of them. After all, Sasori is the grandson of Chiyo, and she gets pretty tight-lipped when someone mentions him." "So that's it, then?" Naruto asks, looking at Kankuro with some measure of disappointment. "He can control 100 puppets, human puppets, at any one time." He sighed, shoulders slumping before realizing something. What's so important about human puppets? Aren't they the same as regular puppets? Kankuro rolled his eyes before replying, "No, that's where everybody was wrong." By using actual human bodies as puppets, Sasori theorized that it was possible to use the chakra nature that person had been able to use in real life. He even suggested that it was possible to use the Kekkei Genkei that a puppet could use when they were alive. But neither of those had ever really been verified, as the public thought that the rumors of Sasori's puppets being made from the bodies of real people disgusting. "That's really all I know." "Thanks, Kankuro," Naruto said, somewhat more upbeat and like his old self in this environment. "But there's one thing I don't understand. What's chakra nature? Don't they teach you anything in Konoha?" Kankuro muttered before responding. "You know how people can use elemental ninjutsu, right?" At Naruto's nod he continued. Well, the reason people can do that is because their chakra coils naturally lean towards one of the 5 elements: fire, wind, water, lightning and earth. Elemental Kekkei Genkei don't fit under any of these categories, but the 2 elements that make them do. For example, your Shodai Hokage could use wood release, but that isn't one of the 5 elements. However, the 2 elements that combine to create it, earth and water, are 2 of the 5 elements. With me so far? Yeah, Naruto said, though it left him with a few questions. He knew that only someone from Konoha would be able to answer them. Thanks for explaining. We'll be on our way, and remember, we were never here. That last part was hissed with Naruto putting on his serious face again before going back to his upbeat and cheerful self and leaving with Gaara. The door closed, and Kankuro was left alone. He collapsed, shaking in fear, drenched in sweat and on the verge of hyperventilating. What the hell? The view from atop the canyon made for an amazing sight as the sun set on the horizon. Suna looked like it was built of gold, shimmering in the last dregs of sunlight, as Naruto watched on with Gaara. So, where are you going to go? Naruto looked at Gaara in surprise, having thought that Gaara wasn't one to lead a conversation. I dunno. North, I guess, head into the land of Earth. Might stay there for a while, probably head into Iwa. See if their ninja are anything like Konoha says they are. Naruto replied, turning back to watch the sunset. And what will you do if you come across Akatsuki? Neither of them were looking at each other, for fear of seeing their friend for what may be the last time. I'll put up one hell of a fight, but I doubt I'll be able to get away from them a third time. The first was 'cause of Jiraiya and Sasuke showing up, while the second was luck, pure and simple. Naruto answered, and you damn well better put up a really good fight, or I'll kick your ass when we meet again. Naruto laughed again, but it simply served to increase the awkward. What if I went with you? Gaara had single-handedly taken the entire conversation and obliterated any of the tension. No, I won't let you ruin the bonds. Naruto was cut off. I have tried, but there are no bonds with either of my siblings, and what I have with you is much stronger than my bond to them. Gaara tersely stated, and no matter how much you may wish it, there is nothing I have not done to fix it. There is nothing keeping me here, and together we may be enough to fend off the Akatsuki. Naruto was silent, considering the options. Gaara was right. Alone they couldn't face the Akatsuki on equal footing. And it was safe enough to assume that the other Jinchuriki wouldn't be able to fight the Akatsuki off by themselves, no matter how powerful they were. Even if they were S-class, it would only mean that they could fight on equal footing with one of the Akatsuki, and it would mean that they wouldn't win against 2 of the missing nin in the organization. Presumably, they were put in pairs to complement each other's abilities, meaning that they were doubly strong together, and were specially suited to take down any one of the Jinchuriki. Going by that logic, then it would mean that they would have a harder time taking down at least 2 Jinchuriki at the same time. Which left Naruto with a single goal to do, in order to protect the world as well as ensure that he and his ilk lived as long as possible. Then we'll head north to the land of Earth together, Naruto said with conviction, standing up and turning away from the city. Gaara was surprised at the ease in which Naruto had accepted that they were traveling together, and stood up, unfastening his Suna Hite 8 from the shoulder strap of his gourd. What will we do? Naruto turned back to look at Gaara, pure determination on his face as grim resolve set in. We'll get the other Jinchuriki to side with us. We'll fight the Akatsuki together. And with that said, the 2 started north to Earth Country, Gaara's Hite 8 quickly becoming buried underneath the sand of the desert. Behind them the sun set, leaving everything in the pitch black of the night. Introspective. It was the border between the land of rain and the land of wind, and they had been traveling for quite some time. They'd moved through the night and well into the day, until it was dusk and they'd reached the border town. The town itself was rather unassuming, almost blending into mountainous landscape, and the duo would have passed by it completely if they hadn't crossed paths with a merchant entering the land of wind. Shiba Kuakaku had been rather loud in pointing the way, her prosthetic arm having been remarkably responsive, despite simply being a plain old wooden arm. Maybe it's like that puppet body thing that Sasori used. Shaking that thought for another time, Naruto thanked the outgoing fireworks vendor before heading with Gaara into town. The trip had been a rather silent one for Naruto and Gaara, as Gaara had never been one for conversation, and Naruto had gone deep in thought. While he may not have been the best at book smarts, he prided himself on his observational skill. And that skill told him everything about Gaara's reasons for going with him. Gaara considered him important enough that he couldn't handle losing. More than his siblings, at least, Naruto thought, as he approached the first motel he saw, only to realize he had no money. Looking at Gaara, Naruto could instantly tell that he wasn't one to keep any money on hand. And so, they found themselves camping out in the forest surrounding the small town of Hanakari, eating more of the jerky he'd been given from Hiyori a little over a week ago. Say what you will about the angry blonde girl, she made darn good jerky. You never really told me why you came with me. Naruto opened, looking at the fire in front of him. Why do flames interest me so? Naruto silently hoped he wasn't some kinda crazed pyro, then remembered his first C-rank mission, and the extremely flashy entrance he'd made at the final battle on the bridge. Damn it, I'm a pyro. He was so caught up in his thoughts that he almost missed the response Gaara gave him. I already told you, there was nothing keeping me in that village. Gaara's response unnerved Naruto. Nothing? Not even your brother and sister? Naruto looked over at the redhead, who was mechanically chewing on the jerky, and almost wished he knew what was running through the former psychopath's mind. Almost. I had reached out to them as many times as I could, but they refused me. Gaara bluntly stated, and Naruto could detect a hint of something in Gaara's voice. Disappointment? Well, what did you do? Naruto shifted into a better position, leaning against a nearby tree, elm, he noted. I did many things, asking for their opinions on anything I deemed on import, thanking them for being there, and yet no matter what I did, they appeared to be even more scared of me. Maybe it wasn't what you did, but how you did it. Naruto sagely answered, complete with faking the teacher pose. Gaara simply stared on, not getting the gist of the joke. Naruto got out of the teacher pose and sighed, muttering about crazy redheads who wouldn't know comedy if it flew out of their asses. Needless to say, Gaara was confused. I do not believe it was my actions, as I am positive that they were quite clear. Naruto leaned forward, but Gaara didn't elaborate, leaving Naruto momentarily slump his shoulders in defeat before jumping on Gaara's lack of faith. So that's it then? You just tried your best, and when you didn't get the reactions you wanted, you up and left the first chance you got, is that it? Naruto was angry, no scratch that. He was pissed. How could someone care so little for the faith of others in such a way? What do you expect me to do, Uzumaki? Go back to that place, and do as you do? Grin at them, smile when they glare, laugh at them while they scorn me? Naruto, shocked out of his anger, looked away at that. Even you cannot admit that it would be wise to do so. So, then what else am I to do except to go with you? The only other person I have met who can understand me. Gaara, Naruto looked at him, and it appeared as though the weight of the world was slowly resting upon his shoulders. I won't try to force you to go somewhere you hate, but that doesn't mean I'll always be there for you to follow. In fact, first chance I get, I'm sending you back there and I'll be right beside you, making sure that you build the proper bonds with your brother and sister, even if I have to kick your ass to get you there. Uzumaki, I do not believe that I will ever understand you. Gaara stated. No one really can say they understand me, but feel free to try. Naruto lay down and rolled over, waving a hand in Gaara's direction. Night. Soon thereafter, soft snoring could be heard coming from Naruto, while Gaara simply leaned back against the tree behind him, next to his gourd, his sand contorting into the curve of his back. He lay there comfortably and watched Naruto sleep, the fire slowly burning itself out. Back in Konoha, the remaining teams had practically disbanded. Kakashi had gone back into Anbu, and nobody had seen him since. Sakura had joined the vacant space in Team 10 left by Shikamaru's promotion to Chunin, training with Ino and working together to take the next Chunin exams and get promoted to Chunin. Asuma and Kurenai had chosen to simply let their relationship become public, which had caused Shiranui Genma to win the betting pool on when they'd take the plunge. The pool was updated yearly, with the pot compounded as the new bets were placed. Now the betting pool was on when Asuma would knock up Kurenai. Shikamaru worked on learning more of his clan's techniques, even creating a few of his own. Kiba was working on improving his dual-piercing fang, not wanting to have another mission end like the failed Sasuke retrieval mission. Shino had gone deep into clan training with his Kakaichu, now quite open about his jealousy at Kiba having gone on the mission instead of him. Neji had worked with Hinata, helping her to move past Naruto, but try as he might, she couldn't completely move past it. Both Hyuga worked to improve their proficiency in the gentle fist. Guy and Lee were more exuberant than ever, working to become stronger than they were before, while Tenten had gone to Kurenai for help train in Genjutsu. Choji had become much more outgoing with mentioning his weight, and had gone on to become much stronger than he had before. One thing was taboo for them all. Uzumaki Naruto. While they'd trained and acted like they'd gotten past it, they were still hung up on what he'd said, and a few had grown to resent him for the remarks he'd made. In the long run, he'd turned them into the exceptional shinobi they were meant to be. In the short term, however, half of them had grown to resent Naruto for his words, and were glad that he'd been placed in permanent solitary. The other half had accepted what he'd said as problems they'd chosen to ignore, and were working to overcome them. That said, a rift had grown between the group, and they weren't as close as before. Sakura, while training with the new Team 10, had asked what had happened to them. Nobody had an answer for her, but they all knew the reason. Naruto was the glue that had brought them together, and without him, they were losing the friendship they once had. Jiraiya had finally gotten out of Karakura, having promised the residents that he would return there soon, and was approaching the gates of Suna. His visage was hardened, and he was a man on a mission. Nothing was gonna stop him from completing his mission. Halt. Except for gate officials. When Naruto woke up, he had sat up and stretched, working out any stiffness he'd garnered from sleeping on the ground. Hey. Like the fox would let me be stiff and sore. The way it heals me. Naruto internally rolled his eyes as he imagined Kyuubi sitting in its cage howling at how trivial things such as muscle cramps and soreness made for a weak vessel. And then Naruto noticed Gaara just sitting there, in almost exactly the same spot as he'd been in when Naruto had called it a night, staring at him. Gaara? Naruto began, dreading the answer. Have you been staring at me all night? Contrary to what you believe, Uzumaki, the world does not revolve around you. Gaara replied, causing Naruto's face to scrunch up in confusion. What? Gaara sighed. No, I did not stare at you all night. Naruto sighed in relief. I occasionally stared at the moon. Gaara got up, not noticing Naruto's eyebrows start twitching, or the deadpan look his face had donned. Do you know what the personal privacy is, Gaara? The addressed teen simply stared at the blonde, who sighed. Weren't there times back in Suna when you would do things that you'd rather be done without other people watching? When I partook in the upkeep of my personal hygiene, yes. Naruto looked away, his face becoming slightly red at the turn the conversation had taken. Right, well, sleep is one of those things that people don't like having others watch them do. Would you have liked to have people watch you while you bathed? I would have killed them for intruding and interrupting the upkeep of my hygiene. Naruto's face went back into deadpan mode, and his eye was twitching more than before. It took him a second to work up the ability to slap his hand over his face, keeping it there in order to regain his composure, before looking up at the cloudy sky. Gaara simply figured that Naruto was thinking, and reached for the jerky and consuming several pieces, stopping several chews into the first bite and giving a grunt of approval before finishing the half-dozen in his hand. Gaara, Naruto began. To other people, there are certain boundaries that others do not cross. Weren't there things that your siblings did that they wanted to do in private? I do not know. Our interaction outside of missions was very minimal. Even when I tried to partake in group activities or inquired them about such things, it was not successful. By this point, Naruto's eyebrow threatened to start twitching again, and he was well on his way back into deadpan look before sighing and giving up on the conversation. Look, there are just some things that, for the sake of other people's dignity and sanity, other people do not, under any circumstances, do. Now come on, we've gotta get going. Naruto put out the fire and filled in the fire pit before packing up. Gaara simply shouldered his gourd and stood by, waiting for Naruto to finish. At that point, Naruto had noticed that Gaara was just standing there while he had to do all the dirty work, and began muttering about damned redheads who don't know when others need help. Unknown to the two of them, their descent into the land of rain was observed by a pair of jonin aim nen. They simply watched the two kids as they went in the direction of the war zone of the damned, not doing anything but silently wishing for painless deaths. Several hours later, it started raining, erasing any trace remnants that the small alcove had been a campsite, and that either of the aim nen had ever been there. What do you mean, Gaara's missing? Jiraiya had originally come to see if Naruto had hitched a ride with an outgoing caravan and made his way to Suna, but it appeared that there were bigger problems in the Land of Wind. As soon as he'd made his way into Suna, he'd contacted his spies in the Land of Wind, and had promptly been informed of two things. Akatsuki was sighted moving into the Land of Wind. Several days later, the Ichibi Jinchuriki had disappeared overnight. Normally, that wouldn't be much cause for concern. Seeing as the Akatsuki had entered the Land of Wind from the Land of Birds suggested that they had to have come from either the Land of Rain or the Land of Fire. His spies hadn't infiltrated the Land of Rain, and it was so closed off that not even a cage could get in if they wanted, leaving one option left. They'd just come from taking Naruto, and may have already extracted the Kyuubi. Jiraiya didn't want to accept that reality, so he desperately hoped that Naruto was still alive, despite the evidence to support that he had disappeared completely from where the Anbu had dropped him off at. And so, that left him standing in the recently instated Godem Case Cage's office. Aesthetically, it wasn't much different from the Hokage's office. The color scheme was different, but otherwise, there was a bookshelf containing the laws of Sanagakure, important trade information, budgetary information, even the different bylaws that governed the individual clans within Suna. Behind the desk, with the sunrise shining directly into the windows, Jiraiya had to cover his eyes to see the man sitting at the desk. The Godem Case Cage. He wore a bandana upon his head, held up with his Hite-8, though the entire left side of his face was hidden. The bandana was held down by strips of cloth, which wrapped around the bottom of his head and around his neck, disappearing within his gray-beige Jonin flag jacket, which had a small cape attached to the back of it, covering his upper arms. Under his right eye were two red tattoos adopting the visage of two flames turned on their side. Sitting atop his head was a large, angular hat, with the kanji for wind in the middle of a blue spot marking the front of the hat. This was Baki, the man who was instated as the new Case Cage once they'd realized that Gaara was missing. What I mean, Sanin of Konoha, is that I sent him out to patrol outside the wall of Suna, agreeing with his request to send him alone. The gate guards, whom you have met, did not report him having returned. It was not until the next day that we found out that he had still not yet returned. I'd sent out a team of Jonin to locate him, but they found nothing. I do not believe that he has gone off on his own, and lately he appeared to have been attempting to be considerate of others' opinions, particularly his brother and sisters. When questioned, they said that their brother had not approached them for their opinion on him going out into the desert. Baki finished. At that point, a state of emergency was called and I was made the Godem, no longer the acting Case Cage. I think I know who may have taken him. The answer prompted Baki to almost lose it as he stood up. Now, before you go off trying to save him, you should know that at this point, all you'll bring home is his body. What are you talking about? All emotion disappeared from the Case Cage's face, and Jiraiya suddenly found himself facing the elite shinobi that was yearning to prove that he was deserving of the title of Cage. He steeled his resolve, despite being enough of a fighter that he could, probably, take down the Case Cage without too much effort on his part. I'm talking about an organization made up of S-class missing nin. An organization that wants to remove the Biju from within the Jinchuriki, and has the means to do so. Jiraiya normally wouldn't explain such things to anyone that wasn't from Konoha, but desperate times called for desperate measures. That organization is called Akatsuki, and by now they've already started the removal of the Ichibi from Gaara. It's too late to save him. There is nothing we can do? Baki sounded strained. He hadn't expected such a horrible thing to occur. As Jiraiya's head moved in the negative, he realized that, while it may be too late to stop this Akatsuki from taking Gaara, he could at least spread word to the other nations of the Akatsuki and their intention with the Biju. Then we will spread word throughout the elemental nations, ensuring that everyone knows of this Akatsuki and their intention to turn the Biju into beasts of war against the elemental nations. The Land of Rain certainly lived up to its name, Naruto thought drearily as he rubbed his arms against each other. It's so damn cold here. Naruto looked at Gaara, who was having a worse time of it than he was. Gaara's sand was absorbing all the water that it came into contact with, so he had to expend extra chakra just to keep his gourd as a gourd. Not to mention the physical exertion of having to carry hundreds of pounds of wet sand, which was denser and heavier than dry sand. Rubbing his arms to get the blood flowing, Naruto wondered if he should ask Gaara if he was okay, as the redhead wasn't showing any sign of being cold. How can he not be cold? He's wearing a t-shirt and pants just like me. Clearly, Naruto had issues. Looking around, there was nothing but the ruins of the city they were in, barely seen in the dark of the day. Naruto was humbled and scared. This was the remains of a city, a snapshot of something they never taught in the academy, a war zone after the war. Several of the buildings still standing were in rather good condition, considering that over half of each individual building appeared to be cleanly cut. And if one looked close, they could see the ghosts of the ninja that had died, lingering in the shadows of the ruins, watching the every move of all the living that dared to pass through the city. And it wasn't just the ghosts of the ninja. In between the flashes of lightning, the civilians that had died as a result of the battle between the aim nin and their foes could be seen, going about their lives as though they had never died. Occasionally, a few would be shown looking at the duo, and once Naruto thought he saw one of them beckon him over, like a father would his child. "Gaara, let's get the hell out of this town as fast as possible." Naruto looked over at the redhead, who simply nodded, looking rather spooked himself. After all, what good is an absolute defense against the immortal souls of the damned? Rolling out the map, which Naruto did his best to keep dry, he looked over the map of the Land of Rain, figuring their location given their speed and time traveled. Say what you will about him, but Uzumaki Naruto was much smarter than he appeared to be. All right, Naruto lifted his knee up and laid the map upon his upper leg, setting in on the remains of a wall. Or a ceiling. He wasn't sure which, but all he needed to know was that the remnants of the apartment building kept them dry and out of the rain. It looks like we're about a week out from the land of Earth, at this rate. If we're lucky and can pick up the pace, we should be able to shave a few days off of the trip. Once there, we can stop at this town here, Rukongai. It's labeled as a market town, with a few casinos. Guess I'll see if my lucky streak works just as well with gambling as it does with my fights. Do you agree? Gaara just looked at him before inclining his head in what Naruto had learned to interpret as being in the positive. Good. He rolled up the map. Let's get some sleep here and head out in the morning. That night had to be the scariest the two had ever had. Gaara, in accordance with Naruto's pleas, had taken to using the nights meditating, steeling his mind against the ramblings of Shukaku. While it was impressive at making entire hours seem like minutes, Gaara was still prone to being woken up by the slightest of sounds, making for great company for a light sleeper such as Naruto. Out of the enclosed space, the rain continued, unrelenting in its onslaught upon the landscape. Inside the dark remains of what had once been a house, Naruto laid against a pile of rubble, which had been crushed under his weight to fit him perfectly, while Gaara simply got into the basic meditative position, closed his eyes, and hadn't moved since. More than an hour passed, and nothing changed. Gaara's sand had moved to enclose him, keeping the cold from affecting his body, while Naruto was left to fend off the cold for several minutes, fidgeting to keep warm until a blanket of sand moved to enclose him like it did Gaara. A nigh incoherent thanks was given before all was silent once more. And then there was sound. Gaara was the first to wake, with Naruto barely a second later, shouldering the pack in a single smooth movement. The sand silently slithered back into the gourd, though the plug was left out for easy access. Naruto, being the lighter of the two, moved towards the doorway of the wrecked room, looking out into the crumbled shell of the rest of the house. He had to stop himself from screaming. When they had entered what had appeared to be an untouched house, all save for one room was obliterated, leaving a broken and crumbled shell of a house to stand. Now, however, it was as though the inside hadn't been gutted at all. Naruto looked back at Gaara, who swiftly moved to see what the problem was. The house was bright, and the second floor, which had not existed previously, was very obviously there. Sitting in the kitchen were a family of civilians, all of them brunettes with gray eyes. There were the parents, who looked to be in their early 30s, a teenage daughter, a younger son who looked to be about 6 years of age, and small toddler running around being chased by the mother while the father stood at the stove cooking food. The duo started backing up, eyes wide with fear, until they hit the wall. Is there another way out? Gaara's voice was soft, barely carrying unto Naruto's ears. No, that's why we chose this room. It's closed off from the outside and warm. Naruto answered, not turning his head away from the impossible thing in front of him. Perhaps it is a genjutsu? Gaara stated, not likely. You have enough of Shukaku's chakra in you that any genjutsu won't really work on you. Naruto replied, before an idea came to him. If I can blow through the wall behind us, then it's a straight shot outside, right? My understanding of the layout of this building has outside being on the other side of this wall, yes. Gaara didn't see where the blonde was going with that thought. As far as he knew, there was nothing in their arsenal of jutsu that was powerful enough. Good, be prepared to run. Naruto held out his hand, doing something that was a first for him, a one-handed Rasengan. He launched his arm out, making noise as it crushed the wall in front of him, sending shrapnel into the room around him, making Gaara's sand raise in front of him in defense. The second Naruto was through, he ran, the room collapsing in around him as Gaara slipped out, following Naruto as the two ran, the house turning into rubble behind them. The sound of the family laughing, however, did not cease until well into the morning. Several days passed, though it didn't appear that way. All Naruto knew was that when it was nighttime, the darkness descended into a pitch black that ate up all light that dared to intrude upon its domain. Ever since the night at that house, the ghosts of the damned began to follow them everywhere they went, even to the barren, muddy fields, where a spiky orange-haired, blue-eyed Nin could be seen simply watching them as they went past, his form disappearing in the instance that lighting lit up the sky and surrounding area. Soon afterwards they reached the border, and were in the land of Earth, the ghosts of the damned watching from where the rain and clouds stopped, staring at two souls that had been able to escape their grasp. For now, the land of Earth was completely different from the land of rain. Where the land of rain had been like a perpetual swampland where the few forests were, the land of Earth was mountainous. The sweeping beauty of the mountains was a sharp contrast to the dark marshes, grabbing and holding on the souls of all who died there. Where the swampland and half-sunken ruins of dozens of cities were a veritable hell, the mountains appeared to sweep you up, pulling you towards the heavens to feel even a brief glimpse of what it must be like in the afterlife. The bustling market city of Tenshi-gai appeared as its name suggests, City of Heaven. The people walking around appeared to perpetually be happy, accepting anyone into their graces. The entire city appeared to shine with a holy light as the sun hid it while rising in the sky, and there were rumors that it looked like it was on fire when watching the light of the sunset on the city from a distance. Naruto liked it. Gaara didn't. While I understand the need to get more supplies, I do not understand how we will get money gambling when we have no money to gamble. Gaara stated, as they walked into one of the casinos, a little joint that looked like someplace that Tsunade would have frequented. That's easy. I know a bit about gambling. Granny Tsunade's very talkative when she's in the right state of drunkenness. Gaara just looked at Naruto, the explanation not good enough. He rolled his eyes and chuckled, an odd sound with his smooth voice that got more than a few women to look around, trying to find the source of that sultry sound. Besides, all we need to do is sweet-talk the owner into loaning us just enough to start. From there, we'll win enough to pay him back, and still have enough left over to keep us afloat for a while. Your financial skills are highly admirable. Well, back at the orphanage, they taught us how to budget our income before teaching us anything else. Naruto replied as they approached the loans office. I must admit that I did not believe that your plan would work. Gaara bluntly stated as Naruto handed him enough chips to pay back the loan, before sending him on his way with strict orders to say nothing except to state the reason he went there. They were currently seated in a poker table, with Naruto being the clear one to beat, what with the small mountain of chips in front of him. Well, a voice said, approaching the table. Looks like you're the one to beat in this casino. Yeah, I must be lucky, never played before. Naruto said, pretending to look at his winnings in awe. And to be honest, I don't really know the rules all that well. A damn good liar, kid, I'll give you that. The person said as he sat down at the table. He had red hair, a brighter shade than Gaara's, and wore it in a high ponytail, almost becoming a top knot. On his head, he wore an oddly shaped brown headpiece, looking almost like a crown. The headpiece appeared to travel down and over the bridge of his nose, and in the center of it sat a Hite-8, signaling that the person who bore it was allied with Iwa. His clothes appeared rather simple, a purple shirt with skin-tight cloth gauntlets on both his arms, and a sleeveless flak jacket on over his shirt. The name's Roshi. What's yours?